see. Preparing. I don't know if you guys can see. No, of course you wouldn't be able to see it. I'm not sharing my screen. We're setting up YouTube Live. And we do have like 20 or so subscribers, but I think it will grow. And there we are. It's actually working. Now, I need to turn that off. Okay. Because it's on a tape delay. You guys still hear me okay?
Yes. Yes.
Okay,
you hear me?
good. Then I'm not.
You hear me?
I just wanted to make sure I didn't turn off the wrong sound. So, all right. I think we will
Amazing.
go here.
Okay.
So, in 3, 2. Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to a special episode of the Three Whiskey Happy Hour. Because we have a martini drinker interloping on our festivities. and that's rare in and of itself. John Yoo will be joining us a little late. He's on Fox News right now and will join us as soon as he can to have what I'm calling the Rumble in the State of Nature Jungle. That's my tentative title for this episode, because we have Hadley Arkes with us to we introduce more properly in due course. Lucretia here as always. How are you this morning, Lucretia?
I'm well, thank you, Steve. It's lovely to see you and Hadley. I have to say very quickly before he does his origin story that it's very difficult for me to even consider calling Hadley by his first name, because I remember him. He doesn't remember me for absolutely clear reasons. I was 19 years old and attending a Claremont. Before Claremont had its summer fellowship program, it had a summer fellowship program that was, much smaller. And I was attending that as an undergraduate. And the great Hadley Arkes was one of the speakers speaking on the First Amendment. And it is actually probably the thing that got me most interested in studying constitutional law, because of the way in which constitutional law was our avenue, shall we say, to the more important questions in America, at least. Anyway, so I'm going to do it, but understand that it kind of rubs me a little the wrong way, because out of respect, I should be calling you Professor Arkes.
That's one of my students who was like, you can call me Your Excellency, something like that.
All right.
But that just melts me that you were there. I think I remember when I gave that talk, maybe the first time I gave the talk about the original argument against the Bill of Rights. And that was that. So you were there then.
Long time ago.
That is so sweet. That is so sweet.
In the world of coincidences or near coincidences, if that's the program I'm thinking of, summer of 1980, right, Lucretia?
Summer 1980. Yeah.
I almost went to that. Peter Schramm had gotten a hold. I was just out of college. Peter Schramm had gotten my name somehow and kept telling me, you got to come to this program. Instead, I took off to Europe with my backpack. And I've always regretted that I didn't go, because first of all, I would have encountered the lovely Lucretia at the age of 19, which might have wrecked my life. I don't know. But I later on saw that, as I recall, Hadley, that program was you, Jaffa, I think Russell Kirk was there, and I have a couple other terrific people.
The only other thing I really remember about the program, just so you know, other than what I said about Professor Arkes, really is true. But the other thing I remember—
Please call me Hadley, Lynn. Please call me Hadley.
Okay. Was two things that Jaffa said, that Harry Jaffa said. And one was that, and I was very young and very naive and did not have much discernment nor understanding. He said that he was very happy that Ronald Reagan was likely to be the next president of the United States, but that Ronald Reagan had indeed signed into law the most immoral statute in the history of the books on California. Yes. And then the other thing he said was that nobody was sorrier than I was when Martin Diamond dropped dead in the middle of our debate. he meant argument, not right. Person. And I remember those two things, and that people were going out running at 5 o'clock at night in the worst smog I can ever remember in Claremont. Yeah. Those are the four things I remember.
I remember giving my talk, and Harry thought it was the first page. They usually open to the first pages of Aristotle combined with Lincoln Douglas. Harry said, I told you could do a terrific talk, a course based on the first page of Aristotle's Politics, and Professor Arkes did it. I like to go visit everybody else, stay for everybody else's talk instead of darting out. So Harry was down for 5 talks on John thing was John Marshall. He never got to John Marshall.
Of course not.
He never got to it. Something else came up. Irving Crystal said something, so we have to go chasing that one.
Yeah.
No, that
Well-
was good. Wait a minute. Okay.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm tempted to Lucretia. Was Jaffa's two statements the most shocking thing, or was Hadley the most shocking?
No.
content?
Hadley actually, because
know,
I had
kidding.
just changed my major from psychology to political
Oh.
science.
Oh,
And I was sort of I mean, I really knew nothing about anything. I got into that conference because the essay you had to write was what about conservatism. And I don't remember the exact question, but my answer was it really depends on what it is conservatives are trying to conserve.
Right.
That's what the conference was on, but I was very new. I had really loved sociology and psychology in high school, and I got to college. I said, "Oh my gosh, this is boring," and I changed to political science. In fact, in part because of Ed Erler, actually a lot because of Ed Erler. But I was still very young and very naive and very uninformed, and so what Hadley brought. And I remember this. I don't remember anything else other than the things I told you was, wow, he's really explaining to me why constitutional law and studying constitutional law has to be part of what interests me. But I was never interested in studying law, simply speaking. So that's what I remember.
Well, I think we should quit there with that kind of an endorsement. I could only ruin anything else. Okay.
No.
I don't think you do that, but let's do this since you know
Yeah.
we do call this a three whiskey happy hour, and occasionally, we actually, if we tape in the evening, we actually have whiskey at our elbow, and we'll debate
Yeah.
about it because Lucretia
It's a
takes
little
my
early in
count.
the day from that martini for me. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it could be, but you are a martini man, and I have to say that in recent years, I'm pretty late to this, but in recent years, I have come to appreciate the virtues and charms of the martini. But there's quite a lot of variation, not just in the gin you use, but how they're made. And so, I'd like to hear from you. What is your idea of the Aristotelian idea of the best martini?
Well, actually, I was introduced to the martini actually by the great Washington lady, Annie Wilson Marks, who was the daughter of an admiral, and she was getting all A's at Berkeley, thought it was a phony, and she met General Gates at the Admirals Club, and he said, "Come with me to Los Alamos. Some interesting things are going on there." And she went there. She was in on everything with the Oppenheimer and everything. She became very close to Dean Acheson and Felix Frankfurter. And Annie got me onto the Dean Acheson vodka martini.
Mm.
And I switched later to gin, but I told people I use the George Goebel principle, which is I know my limit. I just pass out before I get there. and what I was using. I have a Beefeater gin. Except I was at the university visiting my friend Dick Helmholtz at the University of Chicago. He gave me London's Gordon's gin, one of the cheapest gins out there, and it's marvelous. It has some kind of I forget what kind of effective. Now, the best one, of course, is Hendricks. That's what you get at the Alito household. You get Hendricks. That is the best. But I have to cash in a bond to buy that kind of stuff.
Right.
And then how do you make it?
Yeah, shaken or stirred and vermouth.
No. I heavily iced,
Right.
and don't shake it. You shake it, you water it down.
Yeah.
So when I'm out dinner, I just say straight up, just stir gently and give me some ice on the side, and I'll cool it off. But what I want was Bertie Wooster, the kind of drink that will restore the tissues, or that martini at 6 p.m. that will pick you right up off the floor.
Yes, right. Well, now, with a twist or with an olive?
With a twist. I have a twist. Yeah.
Okay. So I had a bartender just this week in Los Angeles at one of those fancy boutique hotels that I always inhabit, who he had sort of skimmed the lemon for the lemon, the acids that are in the rind, and stuck it in the middle of a spear-like thing, and then poured the gin out of a tumbler along the railing of this it was long stick and he said that infuses the gin better with the essence of the lemon oils. And I have to say it was a great martini.
What affectation.
I know, maybe so, but
What
what-
affectation.
Oh my
oh,
gosh.
there-
Thank you.
I mean, fireworks goes along with this thing. It's like the ice capades. Okay, okay. Just pour the gin and
okay. And you don't do vermouth at all,
with some
even
ice, with ice.
a drop in the glass, no vermouth. Are you what's
Yeah,
the old
yeah,
Churchill?
I just glance at it. I glance at it. Right.
Wave it over.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
Churchill's line. Is the way to make a dry martini is to cast a reverent glance at the
Glance
bottle of
at-
vermouth
at-
on the
at the
shelf.
vermouth. Right.
Yeah, that's okay.
You know what vermouth is good for?
What?
Sauteing mushrooms and sauteing onions.
Is that true?
Sweet
Yes.
vermouth
Oh my
or
God.
dry vermouth?
I've learned something already. It was worth getting on this. I've got AirPods and vermouth for sauteing mushroom. Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yes.
Right.
Like to know.
When you need just at the beginning, just a little bit of moisture so that it doesn't stick because it makes moisture. A little bit of vermouth and it just gives this lovely flavor. And I don't know, Steve, we only have dry vermouth in our house, but
Right. Okay.
I imagine, I don't know. I've never tried sweet.
Yeah, well, we have both kinds for various reasons, which I'll skip over. But let's do this, Hadley. I know
Yeah.
most of our listeners have heard of you, and many are quite familiar with you. But I think we ought to do for all our listeners just a little bit of very brief biography and on what I like to say is origin story. So I know you grew up in
okay.
Chicago, and where were you an undergraduate? I'm not sure I know that.
University of Illinois. First couple of years, I took 2 buses and 2 trains across town to make an 8 a.m. class at the
Oh,
University of Illinois at Navy Pier. I just can't believe I did that, but I finished. Well, Judy and I were married in our senior year. My senior year, she came back to Illinois, and we finished at the University of Illinois. But there's only one place I wanted to go for graduate work. I had my marvelous professor as an undergraduate, Milt Rakove, the father of Jack Rakove,
right.
who worked with Hans Morgenthau at the University of Chicago. So I got very hooked into Morgenthau as an undergraduate. And of course, I heard of Strauss, and he told me of Strauss. And I read a bit of Strauss before I got to Chicago. But Chicago was just a transforming place.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, I know you've written a couple times about, maybe it was your first, it's been a while now, but your first experience in the classroom with Strauss, like so many people have, and
yeah.
who was there, a lot of Jesuit students.
Right.
And then, and also Herb Storing, I think, was another important figure for you, wasn't he?
That's right. When I landed at Chicago, I can't believe fall of '62, when the first classes I was offered was a course by Herb Storing on the American founding. I never heard in political science a course like that. Never saw that. It was a wonderful course. It was so good that the architect Alan Greenberg kept prodding me in later years. He's an immigrant who wrote on Washington as an idea. Why aren't you doing a course on the American founding? And it took me a long. I thought it was a very demanding thing to do. I didn't summon my nerve to do a course on the founding till much later. So yeah, Herb Storing was there, and I encountered him there. He was on my dissertation, and the one who was giving most trouble about the dissertation. And
well, yeah, your dissertation was about, if I recall, the Marshall Plan, which sounds a little different from what we know you for ever since.
Well, actually, it was the beginning, but it mainly was about the regime. It was kind of my goodbye letter to Hans Morgenthau. Hooked in the but to say that what is the center of the national interest of our policy? What are you trying to preserve and protect? Not simply the territory, but the nature of the regime. So you could say that those Allied armies that crossed the border in Germany to displace a murderous regime really were serving the national interests of the German people by removing a vicious, murderous regime. So remember that line of Strauss, page 137. Oh God, this stuff comes sort of in the middle of the book, that when the classic philosophers were concerned with the question of the best regime, they gave us to understand that social phenomenon, than which only the natural phenomena were more paramount, was the nature of the regime. I used to tell people, my students, some of us think that the most consequential data of political life are involved in the shift of regime from the Germany of Weimar to the Germany of Hitler, from the Cuba of Batista to the Cuba of Castro. Now that book, The Marshall Plan, it was that the curious thing was that bureaucracy, as Congress was trying to create an administrative structure for the Marshall Plan, what they were doing is trying to figure out where the Marshall Plan fitted in the American regime. Do you take export controls away from agriculture? How to take this whole thing away from the state? How important was this? And it was a remarkable way which they're giving gradations and actually affecting the whole program with kind of operating presumptions. You presume in favor of this, you put the burden of proof on that. So what it was doing was saying, here was, how did the Marshall Plan fit into the American regime? So of course the thing was called Bureaucracy, the Marshall Plan, and the American Regime. My friend George Will talks about one of his books that has sold dozens.
Dozens, right.
And yeah, this is a book that is sold. But I look back at it, I thought, my goodness, I wrote this when I was, what, 25? It's not bad. It really isn't bad. Did I really know that much about Europe and the economy then? But it did move me into all the other things because it was the mark for fact for me that the question of the political regime was the central problem in political life. And that would move me not into the other courses I was teaching. Of course, on political parties, it was what was at the heart of political parties, that they were a real party would develop a perspective on the nature of the regime itself, so that at certain times within the framework of a constitutional order, a realignment, bring about a shift from one party to the other could be the equivalent of a change of regime within the structure of democratic politics. That's what was same with the socialists won in 1945 in Britain, and they were rationing everything, women's clothes, everything. It was a real so it was the question of the regime became central to everything I did after that.
Oh, so you've just helped me, by the way, before I press on, finish something that I'm writing right now. I'm writing a comment, maybe letter to the editor, to a rather unusual article in the Claremont Review of Books by Sean McKeegan, who's
he's terrific. Yeah, book
he is terrific.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh no, I think he's the Gibbon of the rise and fall of the Soviet Union. But this article, well, I don't know if you've seen it yet, in the latest Claremont Review, called "Goodbye to the Good War," and he traffics in a lot of the tropes about World War II, popular with people like John Charmley is the best of them from 40 years ago.
Oh my God.
I think he's got some things badly wrong in the article, and you just put your finger on what I need.
Really? What's the pitch?
Well, that, the Holocaust really wasn't that important as a moral reason to fight the war. A whole bunch of them. It really wasn't a war against aggression because, Roosevelt did nothing for most of the 30s. I think highly contestable historical judgments, but missing fundamentally the regime question you just made.
Oh my God.
So,
I mean, Churchill. Look.
Yes. Oh, he doesn't like Churchill too. He says, we might have doubts about Churchill not negotiating.
How can you do that, Church?
Look, I don't know.
It's very popular these days. I don't know why. Very popular.
Look, if it weren't, we have lots of reservations about FDR, but if it weren't for that executive power started being used in 1940, and Churchill, there probably wouldn't be anybody in my family still alive if Churchill didn't hold on. I mean, they would have made an accommodation with Hitler. And with the seventh would have come back and then perhaps, but he was the one who held out, and there's a yeah.
Well,
can I go back and ask a question?
Well, let me just round this off, and then I was going to ask you, Lucretia, for questions at this point. I'll just share with you and listeners who know that my opening of my response is to quote Jaffa saying history is too important to be left to historians. Remember that famous provocation.
Right,
but then also noting, and this is something only an old guy like me will recall, that on the 40th anniversary of the end of World War II, the CRB published a long article by Harold Rood. And
oh my goodness,
it's completely he mentions some of the same facts and circumstances, but to completely opposite conclusions. And so anyway, I'll finish this up hopefully this afternoon. But much on my mind. Lucretia, yeah, let
So-
me bring you in here, and yeah.
I just want to go back to one couple of sentences you said that the business about changing parties with different principles can bring about regime change. And then your example was 1945 in Britain with the socialists. What I want to ask you is if you believe that the American constitutional system, as say opposed to a parliamentary system, has in fact insulated to some extent complete regime change from happening because parties have changed principles and so forth, that even with all of the progressives have done to try to destroy our constitutional regime, they have been only so successful, and that the constitutional principles, the Constitution itself has actually stood pretty well against those kinds of assaults in a way that, for instance, an obviously parliamentary regime might not do. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense in the sense that what we do is we create so many fora requiring people to justify what they're doing. You have to get that thing passed through the House, you have to reconcile the bill, and at any moment in time, a kosher butcher establishment in Brooklyn can come into court and tell me the ground of law. Would you tell me I can't let my customer choose the chicken he wants, and it's like the fact that the regime is structured in this way is quite important. But I remember years ago when I was debating, ACLU called me in to debate the other side on the question of the Nazis and Skokie. And it was I forgot the lawyer from the ACLU who said, we must be free to hear the Nazis because we must be free to choose the Nazis. Really? To choose the Nazi that would destroy a government by consent? He said, no, the Nazis may not, we can elect Nazis, but they may not enact their program. Really? They may not enact their program. I mean, they appoint the judges, they have control, they may not enact their program. But you're right, it is a little harder, I think. When people worry about Trump, as a tyrant, look at all the barriers and all the courts that they have to go through, run through all that. Yeah, the regime casts up the need to keep encountering these fora in which you're going to have to come forth and give reasons for what you're doing. And that becomes that's right, that becomes a barrier. But see, what happens, the thing about parties is that in a public competition, you can't be everything to everybody. William Seward in the 1840s was faced with this defection of the know-nothings reacting to immigrants. So what does he do? He goes out to recruit Catholics with a program of aid to Catholic schools. And the parties can reassemble their constituency to fit their this fitted the Whigs at the time, who were willing to use the powers of the government to develop the economy and to do things like aid parochial schools. So you fit these things, and what happens is that the parties, if they create an ensemble and reconcile these groups, they cultivate a perspective on the regime. Who are the kinds of people? What are the ends, the rightful ends of a decent government? Who are the kinds of people who fill those executive and legislative posts? And over time, 30, 40 years, the executive and judicial posts are filled with people like Scalia, Rehnquist, Roberts, and so on, instead of Elena Kagan and Stephen Breyer. That makes a notable difference. And right now, I've never seen a division between the parties as sharp as we have now. And if Harris won, the powers of the government would have been used to promote transgender surgeries, to sweep away any lingering inhibitions on abortion. It would have been the changes would be remarkable.
To the extent progressives have been in very, very many ways successful at undermining our politics and constitutional principles and those fora that you speak of, I would argue that it's because they understood the importance of, I'm going to call it education. I actually mean something bigger than that. And I just happened to notice it on my bookshelf for some reason this morning. I was looking for something else. Charles Beard. it was necessary for Charles Beard, for instance, to come along and convince a generation of Americans with all of his faulty arguments that our, sort of almost a Marxist perspective that our founders were just greedy capitalists. And that's why. And so reverence for the Constitution, reverence for the separation of powers, reverence for those protections that kept the government from becoming tyrannical, and the belief that government would become tyrannical, that was undermined in a way that allowed those parties, and in my opinion, eventually both parties, to see government as much too good of a thing, and the constraints that were built into our Constitution as problematic. Is that fair? I still think that the Constitution is much stronger than it would be if they had adopted some kind of parliamentary system, but it was changing public sentiment that allowed progressives to get beyond some of those fora, some of those constraints. And they were pretty successful at it to some at least in some areas, in some cohorts of the population.
Oh, I think that's right. It took hold. The government is going to be administered by by civil servants, right? The what was that line from the, from the George Bernard about the socialists in Britain? They thought, the idea was that the government would be run by civil servants and the police, right? And that thing took. I mean, if we even call that. I'm surprised that Frankfurter and Brandeis at the time really favored just maybe doing away with the due process clause of the 14th Amendment, and
add Holmes to that list. Holmes thought so too.
Oh, yeah, right. But no, I think it really Woodrow Wilson was a key figure here after all, wasn't he? And part of the sense of, but now we now have the deep state, where they thought they'd be neutral, but of course there's nothing neutral about this.
Right.
The people everywhere.
Churchill's warning in that infamous speech in June of 45 was, under a socialist government, our civil servants will no longer be civil and no longer be our servants. And that certainly, I think, is
that's great.
A good line, right?
That's so good.
Well, let me while we're still waiting for John Yoo, I think has been detained at Fox. Let's ask one more question to set us up for the main event, which is, was there a particular moment or particular chain of events or thoughts that led you in certainly, I think, the second half of your career at least, to focus in on natural law as the heart of the matter of just about everything?
Well, what I did come out of my own argument against Markenthal and picking up what was in the air, and with Strauss, I did come to the notion that the regime was a central point in political life. But just as they said, Socrates brought philosophy down out of the clouds to bring to bear on those questions of right and wrong and the just and the unjust that people face every day. It was Harry Jaffa, who brought Strauss down out of the clouds for me. I mean, that Christ of the House Divided was a beautiful book, and it had a profound effect on me. And I found myself the Strauss. I wasn't clear. I was with the Strausses. Later on, they tell me, "Yeah, you really are a member of the family." But they were oftentimes an arrogant bunch.
No.
So back cackling at all the other people, professors, you think you're doing something useful. But it was, I remember at one point earlier on at Amherst, I thought, I think I could explain this. But if I could explain this, why did Mr. Strauss explain it to me? And I thought the answer was, he would mark off an ellipsis. And if you were attentive and good enough to do, you could fill it in yourself. But if you didn't fill it in, you're not going to go off into the world proclaiming yourself to be a Straussian, with announcing all kinds of other cockamamie doctrines. But I mean, it was Harry I think it was actually Harry who contributed to the opening of the Strauss's book, Natural Right and History, by bringing in that reference to the Declaration of Independence. We talk about those self-evident, necessary moral truths, anchoring everything else. Do we really still believe that? that was, you asked about Chicago. You recall that the first scene when I saw Strauss for the first time, and you caught the sense of it. It was ascending rows of seats, hemicycle, and you found in the room gray-haired retired people from the military, seminarians, Catholic seminaries, and young aggressive Jewish kids like Murray Dry and me. Okay,
Oh,
you say, what did this group have in common? And what was at work is that as they were standing contra mundum, they're standing against the currents of relativism that were corroding all of our institutions, including the schools of philosophy. I think that must have been I came away with that. And of course, Harry led me back to it. And then my own writings, I more and more came back to it, trying to find, I was not quite invoking the N-word that conservatives dread, the N-word, natural law, the scary N-word, but just trying to find the most defensible account you can give for the judgments of these things, and racial discrimination, and so on. And one way or another, I found I was backing into what's had to be those axioms that have to underlie anything we, as James will say, everything we know has to begin with certain axioms, necessary truths, and move from things known to
right.
things we're trying to know.
Well, now, I think I've heard you once say some years ago that Harry's Crisis of the House Divided is like your desert island book, right?
It was the book. Remember the New York Times said if you could take one book to the moon,
right.
what would it be? And I said you have to amend it from writing. If you could take one book apart from one of your own.
Well,
let me take one of my own. Okay,
right.
I'd say that because what it did was show how the whole political philosophic tradition from Aristotle Aquinas was brought to bear, and the gravest crisis of the American regime, that crisis of the House Divided.
Right.
It was a matchless, but and so Lincoln would move along, his own reflections move along the lines of Aquinas. We couldn't give the bibliography.
Right.
Well, it's right. Yeah.
Sorry, I always go with Chesterton's answer, which is the one book for Desert Island is Hawkins' Complete Guide to Shipbuilding. But aside from that, I would go with Harry's book too. But share an observation with you that comes from our great friend Glenn Elmers, who in a long piece not yet published makes an interesting observation, which I had never thought of, and it is that the structure of Crisis of the House Divided parallels very closely Strauss's one long essay on Thucydides in The City and Man. And so I haven't read that essay in 30 years. And
oh my God, this is really refined for the cognoscenti, isn't it? Okay.
Well, I don't know. I mean,
it tracks Thucydides. Okay.
I mean, remember the way Strauss opens that chapter on Thucydides is that he observes the Peloponnesian War as the greatest motion, states being in motion. So our Civil War, as you just stated, is gets the fundamental regime questions. But then the structure of the article is Strauss first of all giving the case for Sparta, and then the case for Athens, just as Harry gave the case for Lincoln and the case for Douglas, right? And then goes on, and builds from there. And thought, I think he may be onto something here. But it bears a lot of thought because that essay of Strauss is very dense as usual. As is anyway, I just sort of passed it along as that's original observation I've never heard anyone make before. Lucretia, have you
yes,
say that before?
I actually heard Glenn make it, but anyway, okay. My question to you both now would be, would you substitute A New Birth of Freedom for Crisis of the House Divided? I think I would, but it is because probably the most interesting question to me remains the theological political question and the American regime's answer to that question. And Jaffa's discussion of it there is, to me, compelling. And there are people who say this isn't true, but slightly different from what he determined in Crisis of the House Divided. What do you think?
I saw the latter book. I really asked the continuation of the second one. Though he had he took a different view of Locke later on. Strauss had
Mhm.
a less adulatory view of Locke, and he could see that Locke was quite consistent with our tradition of moral reasoning. But no, Harry's sense was it was the argument this was now the best practicable regime, wasn't it? That's in a way dealt with the religious political problem. I was just recalling, I mean, somebody else. There was a piece I saw this morning on Strauss on the religious problem,
I saw
and
it too.
I remember when he died, Milton Himmelfarb said he was not much. Strauss was not much seen in the synagogue. And I called Milton. I said, Strauss had given a talk at Amherst just a few years before I arrived there. And a guy who knew in English came up to us and said, wait a minute. If I can't take what you say, you'd have to believe in Revelation. And Strauss says, I'm a Jew. And the other one said, well, what does that mean these days? And Strauss says, that's not my problem. So I mentioned I mentioned that to Milton. He said, Hadley, look, it was Athens and Jerusalem, Athens, Jerusalem. His head was in Athens, his heart was in Jerusalem, but the premier organ of the philosopher was the head.
Yeah.
But it's no, we no we no I think we can the argument we can indeed reason through these things. It's the logos. I mean, what what was going on when Abraham was negotiating with God over Sodom and Gomorrah? So the Lord of the universe is not himself being just.
Five people,
It can be
10.
five. Can you say five? Make 505. And that's what they did in this was Brown White was doing with the Pentagon Papers. What if I found that 10 people would die as a result of these papers? 10 out of 5. He said, okay, what was Abraham doing? Arguing with God as to whether God understood his revelation, or arguing with him in terms of body principles that he assumed everyone would understand. Who's that handsome guy who's just appeared?
So
I am
John,
so sorry I'm late.
that's okay, John. We've been having a
I'm
rollicking
so
great
sorry.
time. That's quite all right. But I do think we ought to join the main event because we want to kind of end on time about 23 minutes from now or so. So I mean, there's a lot of ground to cover here, and we've done a lot of preliminaries about how Hadley got interested in natural laws, the central question of just about everything.
Well, I missed all the good stuff. It's all downhill now.
well, here's what
I might just I'm leaving. I missed all you. Come on.
Rise to the occasion. We used haven't used all the good lines yet.
Yeah, no. If you do that, John, we'll have to have Hadley back and then spring him on you unawares. You can't.
That'd be fine. He could be like the Spanish Inquisition, which I'm sure he approved of.
No one hides from the Spanish Inquisition.
That's right.
That was James Wilson's line. Those writs from the common law. We did that writ on burning heretics. That didn't make it across. We didn't use that one.
Yeah. Let me do this and set the scene, and then let you guys go back and forth for a bit. So, John, I think I want to have you make a statement. But I'll preface it by saying this. You're a stubborn guy, and Lucretia and I have had very little luck trying to persuade you of natural law, which you like to say, to the extent that you agree with it or understand it, you think is reducible to, utilitarian cost-benefit analysis. I think the same thing of prudence. Is that roughly accurate? Do you want to extend that as a sort of opening proposition?
Sure. So I wasn't prepared to make a statement, but let me instead put it to the question, Hadley. The question I've been asking them is, they say to me that we should use natural rights and natural law to interpret the Constitution, which I agree with up to a point, which is to the extent the founders agreed with it. Then as that they incorporate that into the way they understood the words of the Constitution. That seems perfectly appropriate to me. Where I question them is when they say, but beyond that, just because it is the correct moral philosophy. So I say to them, well, what happens if a great majority of the American people don't believe in natural rights or natural law? anymore? What right do we have to use this external moral philosophy, external to the Constitution, to use it to interpret the Constitution? Why does it have a better claim than, say, things I don't agree with, Rawls, Marx, any other external philosophy? Why is natural rights superior to those other philosophies in terms of interpreting Constitution or just making moral choices? To me, I worry that we will be guilty of the same sins of which we accuse the Warren Court, right? Taking an external political philosophy that the American people did not approve, and then using vague terms of the Constitution to drive these moral results.
Can I just add a sharpening observation, which is I once accused you, John, of being a closet positivist. You said, wait, there's no closet. I'm completely out in the open, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think that, the Constitution's, we enforce the Constitution's terms, but we don't enforce things that are not in the Constitution. That I think we leave up to democratic deliberation and enactment by legislatures.
Well, happily, we won't have a time where the American people don't understand natural law. It's I don't know if you saw my new book, John, but I really go with James Wilson.
I did. I read it.
Okay. Well, I have Thomas Reed and those James Wilson in Chisholm versus Georgia, the first case of this U.S. report, invoking Thomas Reed and his teachings on common sense about those precepts of common sense that the ordinary man has to know before he starts trafficking in theories. So before the ordinary man will start bantering with David Hume about the meaning of causation, he knew his own active powers to cause his own acts to happen. The ordinary man would have a problem about what Kant, Thomas Reed, others would take as the very first principle of all moral and legal reasoning. As Kant would have it, it makes no sense to cast judgments of blame or praise on people for things they were powerless to do. You don't hold people blameworthy for acts they were powerless to effect. If you told the ordinary man that Jones was undergoing surgery at the time the crime was committed, the ordinary man would wonder, why is he being prosecuted? The ordinary man grasped that. The main precepts of
so it's a kind of like inherent moral sense that people have when they're confronted by basic questions, and that you're saying that most people will respond right, like they just know murder is wrong. But the problem I have is things like, you look at opinion polls, and a majority of the people think things like gay marriage is fine, and a majority of the polls seem to suggest people will be willing to allow abortion.
Well, we could make all kinds of mistakes moving from first principles. So to have those anchoring truths does not relieve us of the need to make the argument. But that all it indicates is that the fact that there's disagreement is not an argument stopper. We have people who don't understand, who ready to support abortion. We pick up the conversation and say, well, what is there about that nascent life of the womb that makes it less than human? Doesn't speak it, neither do deaf mutes. Doesn't have arms or legs. Other people, that's how the conversation goes. It's simply principled reasoning. And what, I used to give my course at Amherst, John, on political obligations, which gave rise to the book called First Things. I used to say, look.
And I admit, a great book.
Oh,
I love the book. Never took the course, thank God, but I read the book. It saved me the time of sitting in class.
Oh, you'd have loved
So
it, John.
awful.
You would have been a fine presence in that class, John.
Wait, did you just say I would be the equivalent of an Amherst undergraduate? Them's fighting words. I've been called worse, but not much worse.
But I was on the way to saying that the course could proceed under the codicil that everything here could be wrong. But to say that is to say, we begin with a recognition that it all depends. The currency will be the giving of reasons. If you accept it could be wrong, there must be standards of. Look, as C.S. Lewis would say, you see kids arguing, and they seem to work. They're not arguing over likes and dislikes. They're having a real argument, and an argument that doesn't make any sense unless people on both sides are assuming they're right and wrong answers. That we have access to the stances of judgment. And that's what's in play here. Yeah, we may find people disagree. The fact that people may disagree does not mean minds cannot be changed. The reasoning of this over the years. But you ask or if you ask the ordinary man, why is it in this age of animal liberation, we're not signing labor contracts with our dogs and horses, or seeking the informed consent of our household pets before we authorize surgery? The ordinary man would just be puzzled by it. You don't make these dealings with these creatures who can't reason. We say the ordinary man understands the Declaration, the principle of the Declaration, that no man is by nature the rule of other men, the way men must be by nature the rule of dogs and horses. He's got it. The main principles are there, easily accessible. So we have the ground on which to work. So from that point forward, Steve, what were you going to say?
Well, I want to sharpen this question between the two of you and do a sort of second round. Hadley, I use that argument about we don't enter into labor contracts with our horses and our pets, or ask for consent from our pets the way we do human beings. At a seminar of graduate students in philosophy when I was at the University of Colorado at Boulder, they erupted in outrage at the proposition.
Really?
But by the way, I mean, they're completely incoherent in response to it. And I had some sequels to it and all the rest of that. The point is that this is a microcosm of a wider phenomenon, which I think John either doesn't perceive or doesn't want to grapple with. I don't know, John. I don't want to be too uncharitable, having already beat you up so much. Is that this is entirely typical of the phenomenon of more than one generation of Americans being systematically misinstructed or confused about basic moral reasoning. And so, the preference for the say majority.
What was their opposition? Why were they befuddled by what you said? What did they understand? What made them recoil?
Well, it's this very sloppy egalitarianism that animals have rights too, because we say so. I mean, really, I think
But Steve, you can't say, okay, on the one hand, we think natural law, natural rights should be the governing moral philosophy because we witness human beings reacting in a certain way, in the same way to moral problems like murder, for example. But then when a lot of people don't, you say they've been morally misinstructed.
Yes.
Right? I mean
Yes.
that's not consistent.
No, I think
It's just because you've already decided that the correct moral view is A, and whenever they deviate from whatever you think the correct moral view, then it's not their genuine, right, moral response. It's some misinstruction.
Well, all right. Well, my answer to that is, well, I'll just use social.
But even though I agree with you on the moral point, I don't think we should be. I agree with that. We shouldn't be making contracts with dogs and cats or anything.
We have a concession from John.
And you know, I hate all of Lucretia's dogs. Those little furry rat dogs that she has.
What?
Wait.
I've made that view clear on the podcast many times. And
I
the
have
cats,
German
oh my God.
Shepherds.
One of the things I enjoy about this is the banter between John and Lucretia. As Groucho says, you make a lovely couple. But let me go back. If these students said, look, you remind me of this. I think what earlier part of John, Edward Westermarck, that great cultural cultural relativist, supposedly cultural relativist, had one of his acolytes saying, "No, it's not true that people may not be held blameworthy for acts they were powerless to." That's something that too varies with the culture. And Westermarck said, "No, you don't understand. That one does not vary with the culture. We've got to get clear."
Which ones? That's what I'm asking. Which ones do? Which ones don't? How do you know the difference?
You know it's a natural. You know that you can't deny a necessary truth without falling into contradiction. It's like the primate who comes up after class saying, "There is no truth," and the philosopher, "Oh, what about that one? Ah, we've got that one, don't we?" When you find yourself coming forth with, we got at least one. Okay. When you find yourself coming forth with these lines or my friend Scalia, the line, we cannot have natural law because we have too much disagreement. It means, the presence of disagreement marks the absence of truth. So I register my disagreement with that proposition and its own terms that establish its falsity. Or we have no consensus, or as Bob Dester would say, really, you took a vote? What did you get a consensus on that proposition that you needed a consensus? Because some of us didn't get our ballots. we had our ballots, we wouldn't have had it. In other words, you keep falling into self-contradiction. Some of these things are just angry truths you have to deal with. Now, that doesn't mean, look, we can have that, we can recognize that as we deliberate, these things may be manually variable. How was Johnson really under hypnosis when he committed that act? How disabled was he? These things can be remarkably contingent. But John, the one thing I point out is the one thing in the mix that can never be contingent or unstable is the principle itself. Once we're clear on the underlying principle, the people cannot be held blameworthy or responsible for external powerless effect. That will always be there. It will always be there. We can deliberate about many other things and set the arguments about many other things. So where are we with this? Like we know utilitarianism. You say, remember this came up in conference in St. Louis a while ago. We're saying, look, yes, we can expropriate all the Jews, redistribute their property. Everybody's income goes up. We've satisfied the good, the material good of the many, or we expropriate the earning of the millionaires or the people who are with outsized incomes, and we redistribute. No, it's the terms of principle in which we achieve that raise the standard of living. Now, of course, it must be implicit, natural. Of course, all things together, it's better to do more good than less. Remember Blackstone had that as a principle that in international relations, people ought to do less harm than they can, consistent with their interests. So a plane violates Cuban airspace, and the Castro regime shoots it down. And others of us would say, well, no, you had an obligation to use less force, less violence in achieving your ends. I mean, that's a principle of natural law that's in place. All things being equal, you should be obliged to do more good or less harm. But again, it can simply satisfying the interests of the many, raising the material benefits of the many depends on the terms of principle in which we do that. I was just recall.
See, I have a utilitarian account to some of these things, and sometimes right, especially like the use of force. Sometimes, and I'm sure Lucretia believes it. Instead of slapping someone, even though that'll do, sometimes you might want to punch another country right in the face, so they won't do anything back to you again. So I was giving a talk to these wonderful ladies. They make Lucretia. I got to tell you, sir, this is a great story. They make Lucretia. They're Lucretia's people. It was the San Francisco Women's Republican Club. So if you're a woman Republican in San Francisco, you're hardcore. I mean, they were asking me all kinds of crazy ass questions about, throwing political prisoners and all kinds of stuff. Anyway, who's committed treason? But one of them asked about the prosecution of Jim Comey, the prosecution by the Trump administration's enemies. And I said, look, I know probably the Christian moral view is 2 wrongs don't make a right. But those people have never been in politics. Because sometimes 2 wrongs do make a right in politics, because we have to deter people from doing bad things against us in the future.
Exactly.
But that's not moral view. That's just utilitarian deterrence.
Look, the Democrats had their passion for the independent counsel until it was used against Clinton.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And it brings home to people, are you really willing to accept this when it's applied with stringent force against yourself? So, John's thinking like, these people have to pay. There's got to be payback. If there's not, they're gonna keep doing it. So the point we're making is, are you really ready to live by the rules you're setting down for others? When you use political warfare, you're gonna have to absorb some of your dish it out on our side too.
Let me try and, as we need to draw to an end here in a few minutes, let me try and draw in one aspect of this. And my proposition is, maybe part of the problem is we simply don't make law students study Blackstone anymore. The reason I say that is before you got here, John, we spent a couple minutes talking with Hadley about one of his great teachers, Herbert Storing. Herbert
Oh, yeah.
Storing
Mhm.
wrote the chapter on Blackstone in the famous Strauss-Cropsey reader I'm holding up for the 10 people who may be watching us on YouTube. John's going to find his copy.
here. I'm wandering off into my library.
And-
Yeah,
and, you know-
I've got to find. I don't have that book with me. That's great.
Well, yeah.
Oh,
Hadley's got it memorized. He doesn't need a copy.
Well, you know,
Ah,
well, Blackstone was not just a firmly hired lawman, but when you get into some of the detailed subjects, my particular favorite chapter is the chapter on homicide in, I think, book 4 of his commentaries. And there he goes through these very careful distinctions about different gradations of homicide, which now we've cast in statutory form for the most part, right? First degree, second degree, self-defense, so on and so on. And I'll just stop there and say, but that I think that is a good example of applied moral reasoning that John affects to be allergic to, although I think he really isn't.
what
I think, as you pointed out,
what part? What part?
I found it. Look.
Oh,
Look at all that. Look, it says 1989 on it.
you make me
Signed
feel
it
like
there, is that-
you make
Look
me
at that.
feel.
Look how closely I studied this with Mansfield. Oh, I should
Oh.
sell it
Oh, that's where you had Harvey.
as a talisman to the Claremont Straussian School.
That's where you
The
said
manual of propaganda itself.
You guys make me.
John.
You make
I'm
me.
trying-
You make me feel like that cartoon in Larson where Smedley realized he's the only one in the audience who didn't have a chicken. And I'm the only one here without my copy of Charles Cropsey and that.
Mine too.
But I will say this: in law school, we primarily teach Blackstone not as a unified thinker. We almost treat him like a dictionary, right? So if you want to figure out, the Constitution uses the phrase executive power, then look at Blackstone because he wrote about what executive power was in the 18th century.
That's right, and the part is a prerogative, but James Wilson was always at odds with Blackstone. He said Blackstone would say that the law cannot contain a principle of revolution. Laws settle things, revolutions unsettle them. But as Wilson said, look, no, the American regime can begin with contain a revolutionary principle because the American regime begins with the recognition that could be an unjust law. It begins with the recognition that we have standards of judgment outside the positive law by which to gauge the positive law. No, but I remember the line that comes back to me on Blackstone was that in malitia aetatem, in malice there is age. When you see an 8-year-old kill somebody and hide the body, you knew that he knew what he was doing.
So we need to draw to a close fairly soon, but I want to.
I just.
You know what? Let me do that. Let me just say this. I think we need to do a sequel, but I think the form of it. should be
Yes.
when
Love
we
it.
have a
Oh,
particular.
I was
case-
just saying about John wanted to do something to protect the American flag. And I think
Yeah.
I'm ready to sign on to that. We ought to go back to
Okay.
that. Right. Okay.
Well, all right. Well, I
Okay.
thought we might wait for
And
a case
Skokie,
that-
and we want to discuss Skokie.
Oh,
Well,
yes.
then
Yeah,
forget
yeah.
it. We've already got our sequel. Lucretia, you get the last question or comment here.
Yeah, just a real quick, actually, it's more of a comment. In an email, Hadley, you accused me of a bizarre notion that the courts should not get involved in securing natural rights. If I gave that impression, I did not mean to. And I would only ask you to consider the format of a podcast, especially with these two
Oh.
knuckleheads, where I can barely get a word in edgewise half the time.
Wait, is knucklehead a natural right concept that has existed
is
through
in
eternity, or is that just a
Absolutely.
Lucretian positive law creation?
Yes, yes, no. It comes
Linda,
directly from the philosopher Charles Barkley.
See, now we agree. See, Lucretia and I agree on so much.
But my point is this, Hadley, I never meant to say that.
We get borne along
And
by
probably
the-
did not get it across very well. We can pick that up next time.
I
Yeah.
can't imagine ever reproaching you for anything. I assume that if you said that, I must not have heard you the right way.
Or I must not have explained myself the right way, which is very often the case because
Well,
as you
right.
can see, we go off on tangents and often it means we haven't fully explained ourselves. I will say quick in 3 sentences, I absolutely believe that judges should have judges on the Supreme Court shouldn't even be judges if they do not understand the natural law basis of our Constitution. And of course, the natural law basis of our Constitution, specifically the notion of human equality. Government exists to secure rights. The government is basically a tyrant unless restrained. All of those things ought to inform every decision that the Supreme Court makes. And our entire government. I never expect that,
Well,
of course, but
I've been persuaded. Jonathan Gina, this historian, brings us back to Thomas Cooley, who thought that the due process clause was really the great device for bringing in all those principles of natural law that the founders didn't think they'd have to set down, could not set down. So our dear friend Dick Helmholtz in Chicago says, well, what about natural law? A summons, a summons. Don't you think that people who are being targeted for prosecution should be alerted that they're being targeted? They say, yeah, summons is part of that. So under the due process clause, you come along with Cardozo and say, yeah, there's got to be a verdict before a punishment. It's got to be a real trial, a serious one. And yeah, you ought to have a summons. Well, once you have that, you realize, yeah, it's there. Those principles are there to be drawn upon. The due process clause just happened to be one device to do it. But look, even if there weren't due process clause, you find somebody's. You have these judges saying, trying to invent a right to abortion. They say it must be implicit in any constitution that equal cases must be judged by the same rules. There must be the logic of equal protection implicit in this constitution. And because there must be something wrong with barring a surgery applied only to women. I mean, they could find access to the deepest, even if it was not there. So we're saying it is there, and we'd have access to it even.
I mean, that's the same. Your words are exactly the same ones that people on the other side use. They just have a different moral principle.
next
But
time, John.
Ketanji Brown,
All right,
Ketanji
all
Brown
right.
Jackson thinks she's doing the same thing. She just thinks
Okay.
natural law is different.
All right,
I'm not on her side. I'm not defending her. I think she's
let's-
wrong, but she believes that.
Then we show why she's wrong.
Yes.
Let's get out till we meet
Get
again
out!
with a couple of Babylon bees.
Okay.
Just a couple I have ready to go,
But
Steve.
guys, thank you.
Oh
Thank you.
no, don't go away, Hadley. I got a
Oh,
last word for you. Don't go away
Okay,
just yet.
okay.
I don't
Babylon
blame you,
Bees.
Hadley. When
I love
Lucretia starts talking, I usually run for the exits too, but you're not getting away so easy. Nice try. Nice try,
I love
buddy.
I love the Babylon Bee part of this show. Okay.
Okay, you're going to have to let me. I have just a few, but it's not too. The Pope condemns God for instituting the death penalty.
Oh,
We didn't even get to that, but
no, not the
many of you will
yeah.
understand. The United Kingdom prosecutes the synagogue for provoking attacker by being openly Jewish.
Yeah, that's
Sometimes they're not even
true.
funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not
Or-
that's true.
Yeah, Hamas
Yes,
rejects
true.
deal to end genocide after learning it would require them to stop killing Jews.
Yeah.
Okay, this
True,
one we didn't
yeah.
talk about either. This was going to be part of my Darwin effect for the week. I'll have to save it. But NFL hoping to win back conservatives with Super Bowl performance by Spanish-speaking man in dress.
Yeah. No, that is true.
Boycott the NFL, folks.
Yeah.
Pete Hegseth hires
Except the
Hans.
Eagles.
What?
Who would they play?
It doesn't matter who they're playing. Don't boycott.
No,
the
I mean, if
Eagles.
you're never mind. Pete Hegseth hires Hans and Franz to get
Oh, yeah.
generals into shape.
I like that one.
Yeah, that's funny.
All right,
And then
John.
my last one, new report. This is for John. New report indicates only 3 people in January 6th crowd were not FBI agents.
Oh, come on.
All right, John.
Okay, everybody. Always drink your whiskey neat. Buy more books. And Steve, what guidance? What have our robot overlords in the AI world have given to us from Mount Olympus today?
Okay. I asked ChatGPT to give us a parody of a Hadley Arcus article. And it's pretty I'm only gonna share 2 extra. I'll post the whole thing on our show notes.
Really?
But
Really?
yeah, this is great fun. I think it's great fun. Lucretia thinks it's too harsh. I disagree. The title, On the Ontological Status of the Ham Sandwich, a moral inquiry into the lunchtime crisis. The first paragraph begins this way. It is a curious feature of our current jurisprudence that the simple act of consuming a ham sandwich has not yet been subject to rigorous philosophical analysis. The positivists, of course, remain content to observe the act as a brute empirical datum, meat between bread, while the progressives, those gentle souls in rebellion against reason, insists that what one feels about the sandwich determines its moral content. But then, a few paragraphs down, and yet, my dear reader, one must ask, if a ham sandwich is made, but no one consumes it, is its dignity preserved? Ah, but that is a question the positivists dare not ask. For to admit that things have a meaning beyond what the state says is to flirt dangerously with, brace yourself, natural law. The late Justice Scalia, may his footnotes rest in peace, once quipped that if the Constitution doesn't speak to sandwiches, then neither should the court. But I submit that is precisely where the court must speak. If the state can redefine marriage, why not the sandwich? If a man can identify as a woman, what stops him from identifying as a panini? And there's more, but I kind of like
That's
all
not
that.
bad. That's
I
not
know
No, that's pretty good.
That's pretty good, but I was gonna say, I say to use that line from Amherst. I think you might have had the wrong Reverend Jackson there.
All right. We'll have to tell that story next time, Hadley. Thanks for
Okay.
joining us. And we will do this again because it's been way too much fun.
Oh, this is a lot of fun.
Excellent.
Thanks for inviting me.
I know.
Bye, everybody. Sorry
Bye,
I was
everybody.
late.
That's okay. Not to
Bye,
worry.
Linda. See you later.
Okay, I'm gonna go straight to the end here because much as I'd like to linger, because I think we may still be live on YouTube, and I don't want to
Okay.
have this after party stuff live on YouTube because
Okay.
who
Well,
knows what we might say.
I have to tell the
Okay.
story that
Bye.
years
Okay, go
ago,
ahead.
I was on a radio interview 40 years ago in Detroit with somebody in Detroit. We're in DC. I got off a good line, and the guy who ran the interview said, "Folks, you don't know this guy yet, but you will. You got to understand. He's a very famous man in certain restricted circles."
That's like the-
I gotta go too. It was lovely.
Right.
It was absolutely
Okay.
lovely.
Probably it's safe to say